Special Agent of the Interior, Lamana Duvari, stood with her arms crossed, looking thoughtfully at the monitor into Holding Room 1, lips pursed. "It's Captain Biona, isn't it?" Biona glanced over at the Interior Agent, who hadn't so much as glanced away from the subject in the holding cell. "It is. I've heard nice things about your family. Your work here shows an attitude of excellence." Duvari swiveled her hips slightly and stretched, making herself comfortable. "Tonight's capture, for example. Very well done." Biona glanced sidelong at the agent, not in the least inclined to discuss her family with anyone from the interior. "Thank you." "Time of capture, roughly 12:30 local time. 40 minutes to get her here through the utility tunnels. We need to get her back to where she fell, I think. A bit of blood and a cut where she fell on that tree root should do. We just need her back before the other students start to wake, of course." Duvari cantered ahead, still not looking away from the girl. "What time do you think, Captain?" Well, the day after tomorrow is Shell. Most of the girls won't get up until late, but there are always a few early risers. We took her to the woods. If my girls are out by 5 a.m., there's no real chance of exposure." "And the injection I specified?" "Administered while Captain Solani's pod was bringing her back. At 12:53, ma'am." "Very good. It should be in effect when she wakes." Duvari stretched again and smacked her lips. "Captain?" "Yes, ma'am." "Your fritters. Do you mind if I have some?" Duvari looked over at Biona and shrugged, her smile both amiable and expectant. "I had an early dinner." No, not at all, ma'am." "That's very kind." Duvari reached over and took one from the plate, taking a bite and chewing thoughtfully as she watched the monitor. She managed to finish it in 4 or 5 bites and licked one of her fingers absently, looking satisfied. "Not bad. I'm glad to see the bunker is well supplied." "We're well stocked, ma'am. The bunker could handle twice our number of pods, so it's actually quite nice. The girls can get outside and get some air now and then, but mostly they're treating it as a shipboard tour." "Tell me, Captain." Duvari paused between bites. "We only trade messages as the need arises. Have you heard of me?" Yes, that is, I have." Biona turned to look at the agent. In spite of the late hour, Lamana Duvari was well kept. Standing 7'3", her lustrous black hair reached down to the small of her back. Dressed in simple jogging sweats, she looked every inch like a professor out after hours, so utterly comfortable in her cover role that you might have thought she'd taken a wrong turn into the bunker by mistake. "I have heard you're called the Empress's Net." "I've heard that one, too." Duvari briefly arched an eyebrow, but was otherwise fixed upon the girl on the monitor. Kellark Gultan lay strapped down upon a metal slab, immobile and hooded in a otherwise featureless room. She hadn't begun to stir, but it probably wouldn't be much longer. "It's unfortunate if you gain too much of a reputation in the interior. It creates impossible difficulties in performing field work if your appearance becomes known, of course, but even just a reputation can be a burden. Still, there are times it's really quite useful." Duvari licked her lips, and idly picked up another fritter from Biona's plate, before slowly canting her head to look over at her. "For example, do your pods think I'm here on a frivolous assignment?" Biona paused and looked over at the agent, somewhere between the talk about the bunker supplies and the fritters. Duvari's bland, even absent-minded look of amiability had been stripped away in slow degrees, leaving a lean and hungry look in its wake. Biona decided to pick her words with care. "No, Agent. No one has said anything along those lines." "That's good to know. I do appreciate it, Captain. Davari quietly sniffed as if scenting the air. It makes operations like tonight run smoothly, if I'm not forced to deal with pointless questions. I have my assignment, and I justify myself to my superiors, just as you do to yours, and to me. Priyan Biona was a veteran of the DefSec Commandos. Over the past 6 years, she'd honed her instincts to a razor's edge. The control room was still, except for the quiet hum of the ventilation fan, and an agent of the interior was quietly regarding her with a 1,000-yard stare while picking over a plate of fritters. It should have been virtually impossible to find a safer place in the galaxy than an armored bunker nestled in the capital of the Shorvanti Imperium. At the moment, Biona would have preferred to be anywhere else. Ah, she seems to be stirring. Good. Agent Davari glanced over at the monitor and clapped her hands. Please, turn the temperature in the room down to a degree or so above freezing, won't you? Freezing, Agent? That... Captain, I have my coat, which is what I'm going to presume you're about to ask me about. Isn't it? Davari looked over slowly. The injection of high caffeine will last approximately 2 hours, which should be more than enough time for me to conduct my questions, and for your team to get the subject back to her room, provided there are no delays. Just above freezing. Now. Kellark couldn't move. It hurt so much, and she wanted to move. Her skin felt like it was burning. Was it cold? Yes, cold. So cold. She tried to think, tried to focus. It felt like she was trapped in a sea of pain. She couldn't move, couldn't get warm, couldn't think. What is your name? Her name? The voice sounded distant, cavernous. Her name. Kellark. You know where you are, Kellark. You are over the deep. You are here to be judged. You are here because you have fallen. Because you are drowning. There was a sound like a low screaming. Was it her? The feeling on her face was the only thing that felt warm but wasn't warm. But was it someone else's tears? And why couldn't she think? She couldn't think at all, and it was so dark and so cold. You cannot hide from me, Kellark. I was here in your darkness first. You cannot fight me. You are here because you have swum your last stroke, because you have already been drawn under, seen your last sunrise, felt your last warmth. The voice was echoing, and all around her and loud, and she thought she was screaming, but goddess, it was so cold, and she was so frightened, and it was dark like she had dived too far, and where was up? But up didn't matter because she couldn't move her limbs, and was she able to scream? It was so cold that it burned and didn't even burn anymore. You are here to be judged, Kellark Gulton. If you do not answer, you will be taken down to the Sea of Souls, never to see the light again. You cannot outrun me. I have always been here, at the end of your journey. I have waited for your last day, waited for your last step to be taken, your last word spoken, waited for all the fight to leave you. I have been patient, and I am here to take you down into the deep if you do not answer. Why are you at the Academy? Tell me why you are there. I am here below you, ready to take you down if you don't answer. You can feel me beneath you. The hand was there, pulling on her leg, and who was screaming, and the words flooded out of her, and there was the terror, and she knew it was true. It was so cold, so cold, so cold. She couldn't feel herself anymore. Someone else was talking now, and was it someone else or no one at all? It was hollow words that chattered about her fear, and about the human, and about the story, and about her looks, and about her hopes, and her hurts, and about the cruel words that girls say in the empty rooms when no one will speak, and all the lost chances laying there now, like unopened boxes on the floor. It was so cold. She couldn't feel, and who was still sobbing? It seemed so far away, and she answered the voice as it questioned and questioned and questioned. Lamanna Duvari stepped out of the room and drew a long breath after shutting the door. The room had stank of fear, and the girl had soiled herself. It didn't matter. She had confirmation of the reporter's story now, and it was just as well to have the matter resolved quickly. Toward the end, the girl had been almost unintelligible, her voice raw and wailing in fear. There was no danger to the objective. That was all that mattered. The girl was still trying to scream as she'd left, but for a small mercy the tranquilizer was taking over. Shrugging off the heavy coat, she looked over where Captain Biona and her pod were waiting. They watched without speaking, and their silence suited Duvari. She felt slightly ill from the smell, but there would be time to wash up later. Captain, I've administered the tranquilizer. Please bring up the room temperature and see that she's given an injection for traumatic stress, and apply topical medication for frostbite before you return her. Biona moved when she was told. That was fine too. Lamanna kept telling herself that quiet obedience was just fine, and released a deep breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Right, then. Not even 30 minutes. Oh, and don't forget a small cut to her forehead. There should be enough blood on the tree root to convince her that she fell. The other girls in the pod weren't moving, but that was the captain's problem. My work is done. I've done my best to provide you with time to do yours. Am I clear? Yes. Yes, Agent. Good. It's late and I'm going back to my dorm. Tell the pod on the first shift I want the report on that other girl back from Central, and on my Omnipad by the end of tomorrow. Yes, Agent. Duvari paused to suck her teeth and smiled. Oh, and thank you for the fritters. The return mission had gone off without a hitch. Captain Setar was tired, but Captain Solani and Pod 6 were doing a good job on Overwatch. Not that there had been much of an issue. True to her word, Agent Duvari had given her pod plenty of time to spare before anyone started to stir in the morning. They deposited the target back at the copse, applied a smear of her blood on the tree root, injected the PTSD drugs per the agent's orders, and slipped back to the utility tunnels. The 3 pods stationed in the surveillance bunker were allowed outside now, and then when no one was in the vicinity. You had to stick close in case someone walked out into the woods, but the pod sitting Overwatch could provide plenty of notice. If no one was within half a mile of the secluded building, it allowed a few minutes in the fresh air and sunshine. Otherwise, they stayed inside, while the building sat alone in the woods, looking sealed and disused. As her girl stepped inside the utility tunnel, Setar paused at the lip to look around. In the 3 weeks since she'd arrived, she hadn't been outside, and as her battle helmet's optics turned night into day, she glanced over toward the girl they were leaving in the grove. It wasn't yet 5 in the morning, and there still wasn't a soul in sight. Setar stepped down into the tunnel, before pulling the utility door shut and locking it behind her. The detail had been quick and flawless, and Setar was thankful for her team, as Jelk and Valan walked with her single file through the narrow confines. They were supposed to keep comms silent outside of the bunker, and Setar didn't feel like talking anyway, but she was glad of their presence. It was far from a straight line back to the bunker, and she checked the map on her HUD every so often. It wasn't a long hike, though it was far from direct, and the walls felt oppressively close. After returning to the bunker, the trio made their way back to their lockers. Setar was glad to get the helmet off, shaking out her hair. She cut it short when she got their mission brief, uncertain how long they'd be in isolation. Setar looked at herself in her locker mirror before rubbing her eyes. It was starting to grow out now. Pod 6 was going to sit an extended watch, so she and her girls could get a few hours of precious sleep. She was still going strong for now, but there was the kind of tired she could feel just behind her eyes, and she'd be out as soon as she hit her rack. She looked over at her girls as they stripped down to shorts and t-shirts that had become the norm when off duty in the bunker. They both looked as tired as she felt, but Roland looked back and caught her eye. "Captain, I was wondering—" "Not till we're in the barracks, Roland," she said, holding up her hand and glancing at Jelk, who nodded back. "Captain's right, Roland." Jelk looked over at the youngest member of their pod, pointing to the ceiling, then placing a finger over her lips. "We can unwind for a bit in the barracks. I don't think I can just go to sleep after that, anyway." Setar nodded, and the trio finished securing their armor, before making their way to their pod's common room. The bunker was spacious enough. Whoever designed it had installed accommodations for 6 pods, and if the building wasn't spacious, it felt uncrowded with just the 3 pods now on station. The rooms were even comfortable, with each pod having a common room. Her sergeants had a room to themselves, while her own had enough space to double as an office. It would have been enviable compared to a shipside tour if they hadn't been sitting on Shill, and not 4 miles from one of the nicest beaches she'd ever seen. Setar grumbled under her breath as she thought about the 3 pods working ground duty as part of the maintenance staff. Maybe emptying garbage cans wasn't such a bad deal after all. As they reached their common room, she nodded at Jelk as she closed the door before slumping down into a chair with a groan of relief. Roland was close behind, while Jelk tied her hair back in a ponytail. Setar watched, noticing the blue dye she favoured was starting to come out after their weeks on site. "You had something on your mind, Roland?" Setar wanted to close her eyes and go to sleep, but taking care of her girls came first. Roland, who was usually irrepressible, looked at her with a troubled expression, but waited as Jelk grabbed a drink and dropped into the 3rd chair with a thump. "Well, yes, Captain, but why couldn't we talk once we got back?" Setar took a deep breath to clear her thoughts. This wasn't going to be a quick conversation, but mentoring happened when it happened. "2 reasons, she said, counting off her fingers. "I know you're not happy with what happened earlier this evening, Sergeant. Truth be told, I'm not thrilled about it either. But you follow orders, and it's always refreshing when you don't have to kill someone while you're doing it. Second reason is that you do not talk about the interior when you're on a mission. You certainly don't talk about the interior anywhere near the hot mic on your helmet. Is that paranoid? Maybe. Is it good practice? You're damn right it is. I've seen all kinds of agents, and that one has no visible sense of humour," she finished, not adding her 3rd reason, that the common room and their bedrooms were the only places she'd cleared as safe from bugs. She hadn't found any so far, but other sections of the bunker might be a different story. "I get that, Captain, but what we did tonight, it just felt... I don't know." Roland's brow creased as she groped for words. "I don't even know what we saw her do. That was just awful." "It wasn't ideal." Roland looked like she was going to protest, but Setar held up her hand. Jelk usually jollied Roland along or pulled her back from saying something foolish, but even she seemed to be keeping out of this one. Look, I'm going to lay some perspective on you. Have any of the other girls told you about the great desert graveyard? Jelk smiled and looked down, and might have snorted back a laugh, but Roland looked lost. A graveyard in the desert? I don't... Not desert. Desert. Setar lay back in the chair and shook her head. Some of the girls think it's a myth, but Jelk and I were there at the port where it happened. This was a few years ago when things brewed up against the Alliance. And you know how the civilians like to give you things, especially the veterans. It happens a lot where there's a campaign going on. Anyway, one day this little old male drives up and asked the Marines on gate duty if he could send desserts to the troops. So, of course, they said yes. Probably thought they were going to get a plate of goodies from Grandad, and maybe not to share. Setar let that sink in a moment. Well, he came right back the next day, with a whole convoy behind him. 60 cargo pods of desserts. Turns out he was one of the heads of House Helbar. You know, one of the big food companies. So, there we are with hundreds of tons of the stuff. Jelk was chuckling around her drink, and Roland was smiling, though she still looked lost. So, after the agents got done with a security sweep over 60 cargo pods, the logistics girls put what they could into the cold warehouse, and we all had double helpings for a few days. Well, there wasn't anywhere left to put it where it wouldn't spoil, so most of it just got shoved in a landfill. And that's the story of the Great Desert Graveyard. Another time I was talking with a friend of mine. She told me about when her pod was working transport security support for a princess, not naming names. Setar peered back at Roland, and for a moment she envied being young enough to still have energy at 5 a.m. Turned out she left her palace without her favourite pillow. Made an agent of the interior travel 7 hours round trip to the palace and bring it, before she'd leave. So, now I expect you're wondering what any of this has to do with tonight. Roland bit her lip a moment, and frowned in thought. Well, yes, I mean, that's funny and all, but I don't really get what you're telling me. All right. Tell me what you saw tonight. We brought the girl in for questioning, but I've never seen anything like that. The agent injected her with something. It's called Hycophene. I don't know what that is. Setar's eyes flickered over to Jelk. Usually good-natured, she'd chime in when Roland needed mentoring, but any humour from telling old stories had vanished, and the sergeant was silently brooding over her drink. No reason you would have. It's classified as need to know, just like everything else on this op, but now that you've seen it, I suppose you need to know. You know about the meds to treat stress disorders? Setar could see the light starting to dawn and hated herself a bit. Roland was incredibly gifted and had made it through the DESET program with outstanding marks, but she still suffered from the one drawback. She was young, unseasoned, and there were moments like these when Setar hated being her education. Yeah, I see you're getting the picture. So the word is that when they learned to treat PTSD, they found out how to trigger things too. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know the science, but Hycophene triggers the fear centers of the brain. Triggers a short-term outbreak. Terror, disorientation, the works. Setar reached up to rub her jaw, hating the conversation. The interior kept that insidious shit. Hushed it up so no one knows about it, either. So they only break it out when they're deadly serious, or don't have the time to do things the old-fashioned way. Roland sat in a ball, drawing her knees up to her chin and wrapped her arms around them, staying there a while before she spoke. Is she going to be all right? I mean, the injection we gave her when we put her back. She's probably going to be a mess for a day or two, but what you gave her should counter the Hycophene. Setar watched Roland absorb that for a while. There wasn't much of an age difference between the two women. Honestly, the whole mission had turned Sitar's stomach, but at least she understood it. This was probably Roland's first time. Look, this is the point. I've seen agents do grunt work just like the rest of us. I've seen them sent on stupid, mindless errands from security checks on Tshirt to grabbing pillows. I've seen them do good work at their best, and I've seen them be stupid, spiteful bitches at their worst. Sitar watched Roland curl into a fist as she worked through an unpalpable truth. 6 pods of death heads on station here, and an agent sitting as bodyguards right in the middle of the capital? Come on, Ree. You know the objective we've been watching day and night isn't just some nobody. So, now you know what you know. Tell me what you saw tonight. Roland frowned in thought as she passed the night out in her mind. When she spoke, her words were tentative. The agent made sure there wasn't a threat to the objective. That's right. Sitar felt a trickle of relief. It didn't dispel the sick feeling of what they'd watched, but this was a covert operation, directly under the interior, and for Roland that could well mean growing up the hard way. So we brought her in, she was questioned, and we set her loose with a bump on the head from falling over a tree root in the dark. Downside? She has a couple of really bad days ahead. Upside? She isn't disappearing into a prison cell or a body bag. Sitar looked over at Jelk, who only quirked her mouth in a silent reply. Look, I know that doesn't feel like a win, but sometimes a lack of casualties is the best you get. That agent is 100% on mission, and for the interior that's acting as internal security and protecting the royal family. If you want helping, then you stay the fuck out of the way. Captain, whispered Roland, that wasn't just interrogation. That was blasphemy. Yes, it was, Sitar said flatly. Tired as she was, she still felt a pang of jealousy. Roland wasn't innocent, but she was still devout in a way that Sitar no longer felt able to afford. At some point, the next objective had become more important than the 8. Making sure the mission was a success, and her girl stayed alive, had become the question of her every waking moment. It wasn't right, but it was the truth. Just don't forget it. Jelk set her drink down and reached over to squeeze Roland's shoulder. Because that bitch is stone cold.